Congratulations, the left no longer has to continue its campaign to destroy Christians by calling them Christian nationalists. It can stop, it can cease, they could just kick back and do it no more because Christians are doing it for them now. Welcome back to Spare No Arrows. My name is Cody Lawrence. It's been a long time. I was sick, but I'm back with a vengeance. There is a growing rift between Christians right now. It's surprising. It's shocking. And this growing rift is over Christian nationalism. You know, within the past few years, the left has been using Christian nationalism as a talking point, as a weapon against Christians. And there have been two responses. On one hand, one response is to embrace the term Christian nationalism. And on the other hand, the other response is to refuse it. And often the people who are refusing the term, they can't just leave well enough alone. They not only refuse it, but they have to force other people to refuse it too. Now, where I stand, let's just define Christian nationalism first. Before I tell you where I stand, if you are a longtime listener of the show, you know exactly where I stand. But for the new people, let me tell you where I stand. But first, define. So the left's definition of Christian nationalism, what they were using early on, around the time of the vaccines or around the time of critical race theory or even around the time of when Roe v. Wade was overturned, they would basically say, oh, you want Roe v. Wade to overturn because you're a Christian? You must be a Christian nationalist. Or what you think burning down cities in the name of free speech should be outlawed. What are you, some kind of Christian nationalist? Or, things of that sort. And so therefore, if we put the nonsense to a definition, what we would learn is that the definition of Christian nationalist that is at least popularly accepted by the left is this. A Christian nationalist is merely a Christian who believes that we should live out our faith in the world. Right? That's the left's definition. And I like that definition. If they're going to accuse me of being a Christian who wants to live out my faith in the world, I accept. And I'm going to try to use that as a weapon back on them. And I think that is exactly what a lot of Christians are doing. And I think those Christians who are doing that are very wise. Now, there are connotations to that where it's like, oh, well, there's the National Socialist Party, Nazis. And so I don't want to associate with the word nationalist at all. But I think there's an argument to be made where, a lot of these people who are embracing the term nationalist, like myself, it just means you love your country. You want your country to be Christian. If you don't want your country to be Christian, what do you want it to be? Atheist? There are actually Christians out there who want their country to be ruled by the gods of the secular world. Now, they wouldn't call them gods, but they want their country to be secular as opposed to Christian. They say that God thinks that America should be, now God, right? God thinks America should be unfaithful to me. And that is the most faithful thing that they could do. Weird. If America is unfaithful as a whole, like if America is non-Christian, if America does not associate itself with Christianity, that is, in my plan, a lot more than if America were faithful Christians. Because if a person is faithful Christians, if a person is a faithful Christian, then they will naturally live out their faith in the world. The Christians who do not embrace the term Christian nationalists, they still believe that they should live out their faith in the world. They just, I think, don't like the term nationalism because it's got some negative connotations. But that's neither here nor there. I want to talk about these attacks that are happening because I think, like I said, the vast majority of people who identify with the term Christian nationalist, we can broaden the definition, we can make it more robust, but when it comes down to it, what the left thinks Christian nationalism is, and what I think Christian nationalism is the natural outpouring of Christians living out their faith. Okay? If we live out our faith, I should not just live out my faith in my heart, it should come out of my fingertips. My faith is going to impact my work, yes. My faith is going to impact my family. It's going to impact all of my behavior. And if my faith impacts my behavior and I walk into the polis, where we get the word politic, the social realm, if I walk out into society, then my faith is also going to impact my behavior in society. And if my faith impacts my behavior in society, then, if you make an entire nation full of Christians, then that Christian or that nation is going to be Christian, and they're going to have Christian laws, and they're going to do Christian things, and they're going to pass Christian judgments, and they're going to believe in Christian sin, right? And we did have a Christian nation, in fact. I would say we still do. Our nation was built on the foundation of Christianity, undeniably, and maybe I'll talk about that more in another podcast because I think this is worth talking about a lot. But let me give you some background specifically about this rift that is being created within Christianity. So there is a group of people called, there's more than this, but probably a big group of people that I'm aware of that is pushing, anti-Christian nationalism is the G3 folks. G3 is a popular Christian conference. I'm not saying that it's bad, but a lot of people here think that we're bad, which is sad. It's crummy. I don't like being attacked for something that I think that we should be able to have a conversation or disagree about. And so G3 folks like Scott Aniol or Owen Strachan and others are going on these tirades against Christian nationalism, and they appear to not be willing to have conversations with big name Christian nationalists about this. And I've listened to podcasts and I've heard people say, we're like, yeah, I've tried reaching out to these people and they just won't talk to me. They think I'm some kind of heretic, basically, and that sucks. It's so sad to hear that because I want to have a conversation with these people, and surely these people don't want to have a conversation with us. Now again, I don't think all G3 guys are bad, but one of the big themes of the G3 conference this year is going to be anti-Christian nationalist. In fact, Owen Strachan just, trumpeted a change of plans where he was going to have a speech about something, but now it's going to be about the evils of Christian nationalism. Yeah, let's get them. And I think it's sad that they're attacking Christian nationalism because in most cases, I think they're either attacking something that doesn't exist because many of them think, and it seems like, Owen Strachan and Scott Aniol, I think, it's especially Owen Strachan, believes that white nationalism, whatever that means, is rampant. But that's exactly what the left has been saying for years now. Why are you using their talking points? And that's one of the main reasons, and I might do a podcast episode about this too, so look forward to that. I'm gathering evidence. Why Owen Strachan, who I trusted, who I believed was a solid guy, and I think he's still solid to an extent, but he's certainly not solid about this stuff. Owen seems to have rebounded into his old woke ways. Owen Strachan was undeniably woke in the past, and he seems to be doing it again. I'm going to read a post from X.com, previously known as Twitter, from Owen Strachan. He was responding here to Allie Beth Stuckey. Allie Beth Stuckey made a post that I thought was very good. It's a very good post. She says, I sincerely want to understand the position that, quote, Christian nationalism is the biggest threat America is facing. Now, she posted this on August 12th, just recently. She says, how can this be asserted with a straight face when every single major institution and system in the world and every major corporation is dominated by leftism? Help. So basically she's saying, how is Christian nationalism the biggest threat in the world when the biggest threat in the world is obviously leftism, let's just say it's not even the biggest. Leftism dominates all these major institutions, and leftism hates Christianity. And so how can Christian nationalism be a threat when the left is, has the power to squash it, right? How is that possible? So Owen Strachan responds. He says, white Christian nationalism, quote, so he turns it from Christian nationalism to white Christian nationalism. He says, it is nothing but, he didn't proofread this post. It is nothing but than, he means just to say but, it is nothing but wokeness's boogeyman. White Christian nationalism is nothing but wokeness's boogeyman. Instead of clearly delineating its own body of political ideas, wokeness wolfishly deflects, choosing to demonize a largely fictitious system. White Christian nationalism just means what the woke detest. So I think Owen, ironically, is spot on here. And he just posted this on August 12th too, which is ironic because this is surrounded by other posts about the evils of white Christian nationalism. Am I misunderstanding? I mean, this seems like an obvious contradiction, but I must be misunderstanding something here. So, I mean, if you think he means something different by this, please tell me. But it seems to me like Owen is going on this tirade recently about the evils of Christian nationalism. And then he basically just says here, I mean, he does say it. This is just wokeness's boogeyman. So Owen is admitting that he's woke. He says it. He says it right here. And then he goes on to say, 1, this was and is a slur applied to the unwoke like me. I agree. That's what I just said at the beginning of the episode. The left has used this as a slur and a weapon to just faithful Christians, in other words. Number 2, white nationalism has gained major steam since then. 3, I am not omniscient and did not see the coming storm as I do now. Alas. And then number 4, in maligning many of us, wholly unfairly, the woke let kinists in the back door. Okay, so maybe Owen is like disagreeing with the point that he made or like adding to it or something, but basically says like, yeah, this is a boogeyman, but really it's not because kinism, because white nationalism still exists. Anyway, kind of weird. So that's what Owen says. And I think, like he says, it is largely a fictitious system. So a lot of these anti-Christian nationalist type, they're punching in air, they're shadow boxing, and it's not even trained to anything because these people don't exist. And also, they happen to be the same kinds of people that don't name names. Can they name names? There was a kerfuffle between Owen and Andrew Torba. Andrew Torba has seemed to have deleted his account now, which is a shame because Andrew Torba posted a strange tweet that a lot of people evidently misconstrued. Some people contacted him for clarity, and he rephrased. He basically said something like, he said something that people assumed meant interracial marriage was bad. And then Andrew Torba, and then Owen Strachan started attacking him. And then Andrew Torba said like, no, I don't think interracial marriage is bad. And then, everybody's like, all right, good, except for Owen. So he's still on that tirade because a lot of these people, they don't care what you actually believe. They don't want to have a conversation with you. They just want to attack you. They want to destroy you, which incidentally sounds a whole lot like cancel culture, which is a product of the left. So that's a bummer. So let me show you this Scott Aniol post also. And this is my main point. This is what I want to get at. I have discovered something recently. I knew this before. I had drawn this connection in the past, but Scott Aniol confirms my suspicion. There was something else that I want to show you in just a minute that also confirms my suspicion, and I think it is so interesting. So let me read this tweet for you. First, there was some guy who posted a video about making some kind of case against Christian nationalism because it is postmillennial in nature. Look, if you don't know what that means, it doesn't matter. I'll explain it later. Don't worry about it. But this guy, Greg Thornburg, says when you sign, quote, the statement on Christian nationalism, you are, number 1, subscribing to postmillennialism, number 2, theonomic reconstruction, and 3, a redefined Great Commission. Now, I agree with all those things, except for the redefining of the Great Commission. I think you are subscribing to postmillennialism. I think you are subscribing to theonomic reconstruction. I think you are also subscribing to a faithful representation of the Great Commission, and I think that's what the key is. And then there's a video, and then some guy named Thomas says, I unequivocally 100% agree with Greg's summary. It is what I have been saying this whole time. If you are amill or premill and can back this, then you are subscribing to postmillennialism. Stop pretending that you are amill or premill, because neither leads to nationalism. So in other words, he's saying, if you're a Christian nationalist, you've got to also be a postmillennial, which is a very interesting thing. And then Scott Aniol retweeted this, so he seems to agree with the sentiment here. Now, that's the thing that I wanted to talk about. So if your eyes are glazing over when you're hearing all these big words, amillennialism, premillennialism, postmillennialism, don't worry about it. Let me explain. So there are some theological concepts that just don't enter into our personal life whatsoever. Like if you're there, are just some theological ideas that like maybe there's a doctrine here or there that, some monk cloistered himself up in his high tower for 20 years to develop. Probably not important for you to know every detail of, right? And one of those things that I think makes a lot of our eyes glaze over when we talk about it is called eschatology, which basically just means, stay with me, it basically just means where the world is going to end up. All of us have eschatology. All of us have a belief, if we have thought it through very well or not, about where the world is going to end up. And I think this is very, very important. I think your behavior in pretty much everything you do actually is influenced by where you think the world is going to end up. And this is obvious. Like, if you know that you're going on a trip next week, your behavior this week is going to change based on what you know is going to happen next week. If if we think something is going to end a certain way or something is going to happen at a certain time, it impacts a lot of the stuff that we do today. And I think similarly, the way that we think the world is going to end up theologically, the ultimate way that we think the world is going to end up, affects pretty much everything we do on earth. And there are three different views of, within Christianity, three main views. I'm sure there are others, but the three main views about how essentially people think the world is going to end up are those three positions that I said earlier. And I want to explain them to you. And I want you to think, what do I believe? And I also want you to maybe rethink what you believe and consider what the best option is, because I grew up a certain way, and I grew up believing a certain thing about how the world was going to end up. I'll tell you what that was later. And it's very different than what I believe now. I think once I started examining what the Bible said, and once I, was exposed to these new ideas for the first time, it's not like I was biased towards them. I had never heard them before. And I didn't very quickly change my mind either. It sounded very attractive to me. It sounded true. It sounded good. And so now I believe something different. And so what I want to do is first, another piece of evidence. I want to show you this John MacArthur video. I'll play that now.
What is the practical to-do for Christians who want to try to safeguard a future for their children? Is it something approximating Christian nationalism, where you band together and create laws that are recognizably Christian, or is it something quieter and just a quiet faithfulness? What's your take?
The Bible says that things are going to get worse and worse, not better and better. It really doesn't matter what the government does. You've got to get off that train, and you've got to say, I am a part of the Church of Jesus Christ. So how do you protect your children in the future? By having them in a church where the Word of God is exalted, where Christ is lifted up, where God is worshiped, where the pursuit of holiness is manifestly the pursuit of the congregation, where there's compassion and care, clarity about truth. The church is the pillar and ground of the truth. The protection for families in the future is not going to be the government. It's not going to be the government, because eventually, according to all the prophecies, the government will turn on the church. The government is always the persecutor because they're the only ones who can put people in jail and kill them. You know, your neighbor can't be your persecutor. He can't come over and shoot you or he's going to go to jail. So government is always the ultimate persecutor, and they've shown that they're willing to do that.
So if you notice, on Babylon Bee, they had John MacArthur on, and John MacArthur is very famous for saying the phrase, "We lose here. We lose here." He thinks the world is going to end badly. Like most Christians, probably most people listening to this podcast believes that the world is going to get worse and worse before Jesus comes back. I want you to rethink that. And that might sound crazy to hear because you probably think, like I used to think, but everybody believes that the world's going to get worse and worse. Not exactly. And although I love John MacArthur, I think he's very wrong on this. And in fact, this is a blessing, I think that John MacArthur doesn't live like the world is going to get worse and worse. He lives actually like there's hope for the world, which I want to encourage you of having too. But this is another piece of evidence where actually at the root of this Christian nationalist conversation is eschatology. It's where you think the world is going to end up, which, man, was mind-blowing to me when I discovered this. And then I saw these posts and the video, and I was like, man, I think I'm onto something. Got to talk about this. When normally, you might think, oh, the Christian nationalism debate is, at the core of it is like patriotism or, something else. But no, I think at the root of Christian nationalism, of how exactly you believe you ought to live out your faith in the world, which, is what the left's definition of Christian nationalism is, Christians who live out their faith in the world a certain way. At the key of that is where you think the world is going to end up. How you live out your faith in the world today is directly dependent on how you believe the world is going to end up in the future. So what I want to do is tell you what the three options are. I'm not going to use the big theological words for those of you who don't like that stuff. But I just want you to consider three options, right? And these three options match the options I gave earlier. One option, and also, if you're a premillennial or amillennial or postmillennial or whatever, I'm trying to give the most true and accurate version of your belief. And so if you disagree with me, reach out to me. You can send me a message on Instagram. You can write a comment on YouTube. I'll respond. And then I'll respond to it in a future podcast too, because I'm okay with interacting with people about these things. But I don't mean to offend if I say something that sounds incorrect. I'm not trying to make any of these options look worse than the other. I'm trying to just give an accurate representation of what these options are. So here they are. Option one. Think about this. Do you believe this, or does this sound good to you? Ultimately, on earth, Christianity loses. This is John MacArthur's position. The Great Commission to disciple the nations fails. Now, the guy earlier, he said, a redefined version of the Great Commission. The Great Commission is this: go forth. Well, let's back up. All authority on heaven and earth has been given to me, says Jesus. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you to do, right? That seems pretty straightforward to me. I don't think people are defining that or interpreting it differently. I think you can either believe one of two things. You can believe that Great Commission, that command that Jesus gave to his disciples can succeed, or you believe that it can fail. So John MacArthur's position says that on earth, Christianity ultimately loses. The Great Commission to disciple the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, it ultimately fails to disciple the nations. The nations at the end of the world are not discipled, and therefore God never actually intended on that happening. He just intended on it happening to a certain extent, because it won't happen. The dominion mandate, the command that God gave to Adam and to Noah, and I believe also to Abraham, And then also, again, I think through the new covenant, to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And as it says in Ephesians, that the church will fill him who fills all in all, fill the world, that the church will cover the world. That was never actually meant to happen. That was never meant to succeed. We will the church will never fill the earth. Maybe they believe, well, like people will fill the earth, but it's not the church. But I think the dominion mandate carries through into the new covenant, and and is actually a command for Christians to fill the world, as it says in Ephesians. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Option 1, Christianity loses, Great Commission fails, dominion mandate, never meant to succeed. Okay, that's option 1. It doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound hopeful. It is summed up by John MacArthur saying, we lose here. And so what John MacArthur said in the Babylon Bee short that I just shared was, what we need to focus on is getting our families into good churches. And like, that's where it ends, because John MacArthur knows that the governments are not going to be Christian. But what if the governments were going to be Christian? That would change things. That would change how we live our lives. And ironically, like I said earlier, John MacArthur lives very much not like he believes this, because he fought legal battles against vaccine mandates, and he won a lot of money. His church won a lot of money. He wrote a letter to the governor of, I think he's in California, calling him to repent and believe in Jesus. So like, John MacArthur is very much acting in such a way to where, like, you wouldn't be doing this if you believe you were going to fail. Okay, option 2. That first option is called premillennialism. Option 2. It doesn't matter what happens on earth. Doesn't matter at all. We can win, we can lose, who cares? The physical world doesn't matter one bit. Our victory is in heaven, and we will receive victory in heaven. And I think that's an accurate representation, although this view, I think, is the most nebulous of all the views. It is called amillennialism, but amillennials, they don't even like this view, or they don't even like the word, because the Bible talks about there being a millennium, and amillennial means no millennium. And so, like, I wish they would come up with a better name for themselves. So amillennialism basically says there is this transition from physical to spiritual, something like that. And so the physical world, it's supposed to die. The spirit is what matters. Which kind of sounds like Gnosticism to me. I don't know. And this amillennialism is what most of the G3 guys are. Definitely what most of the people are who are pushing against Christian nationalism. In fact, the funny thing is, a lot of premillennials, they're on board with Christian nationalism too. I think they're inconsistent, but they're fighting for victory here on earth, which I think is great. So the third option is this: God intends on following through on his promises and commands. He intends on it. The Great Commission succeeds. God gives this command to disciple the nations. Therefore, the nations will be discipled. The dominion mandate succeeds. God commands the church to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And it will succeed. The physical world does matter. The spiritual world matters. They are interconnected inseparably. And the church's victory is on earth and in heaven. But it's on earth. It's on earth where it was put. The church was put on earth, and its victory is going to be on earth. And it's going to be in heaven. So Christians win, even if you don't win in your individual life, you might die a nasty death, right? That's not victory. But there is an ultimate physical victory for the church as a whole. You're fighting a battle, and your team wins in the end, even if you die, right? But in the other options, in premillennialism, premillennialism says you fight a battle and then your team loses. Postmillennialism, the third option, the one that I hold, says that you're fighting a battle and your team wins. God's team wins. And amillennialism says, we're fighting in a battle. You can choose to or not. participate if you'd like. The battle really doesn't matter at all. It matters. Our reward in heaven matters. That's all that matters. The battle doesn't really matter at all. And I'm honestly, I think that's what you believe. And so if I am mischaracterizing your position as an amillennial, let me know, honestly. Now, I do want to clarify this. None of them actually believe that Christianity ultimately loses. A lot of premillennials have a big problem with John MacArthur saying we lose here. And they'll say, no, we don't lose here because we get to go to heaven. Well, I think John MacArthur's being honest, and he recognizes yeah, you can lose here, but you can win in heaven. But you are losing here. And, that's not the story of the Bible that I read. I read a story where God actually does what he intends to do. Imagine this. I think another very powerful argument. Let me say this first. Also, I think, so none of them actually believe that Christianity ultimately loses. They believe that Christianity ultimately wins. But the distinction is what part the physical world plays in that. But to premillennialists and amillennialists, the victory is merely spiritual. But postmillennialists, people who believe that, we're going to win here, believe that the victory is not merely spiritual, but it's also physical. I think that the church will have a physical victory on earth and not just a spiritual victory. I think that the victory is physical and spiritual, just like we are physical and spiritual. Our body actually matters. When Jesus was resurrected, he was resurrected in a physical body. He didn't merely have a spiritual body. He wasn't a spirit. He would have been gone. He would have disappeared, right? But Jesus was physical. People touched him. The physical matters. And I think because Jesus was incarnated in a physical body and he is spirit, just like we have a physical body and we are spirit, I think the church will have a physical victory and a spiritual victory. Everybody agrees that we'll have a spiritual victory. I think that the victory is physical as well. So also narratively, consider this. Narratively, what is the more hopeful story? The church, which is the bride of Christ, overcoming hardships, overcoming unfaithfulness, coming to meet her husband after overcoming all of these things, spotless and clean and faithful, and joining with her Lord forever. Does that sound better, or does this other option sound better? A rotten, dirty, unfaithful bride of Christ who has only gotten worse and worse over time, meeting Jesus. And then Jesus snaps his fingers and says, all right, you're all better now. Let's get married. Which sounds better? Which is the better story? Now you might say, well, who cares how stories sound? Like that's not biblical evidence. But, I think it is. I think God is a God of stories. I think God structures the world in stories. Stories, narrative, this might sound weird, but I think it's a building block of the way the world functions. Like the way that God communicates to us is through stories. God delivered his word to us in a book written on paper with text full of stories. So God communicates to us through stories. Stories are a big deal. And if the Bible were a bad story, it would not be true. And so I just think, what's the better story here? There's no story in the Bible that's a bad story. Every story is full of goodness and justice and truth. There's no bad stories in the Bible. And so why would God structure the entire world to play out a bad story? I don't think it is. I was speaking with an amillennial acquaintance of mine, and he was saying, no, I don't see it like that. I see it more like Jesus is slaying the dragon to save his bride. And I was like, well, I agree with that. Jesus already slayed the dragon, but the difference is, does Jesus slay the dragon to save a dirty, rotten, nasty prostitute bride? Or does Jesus slay the dragon to save a bride who has overcome all of these hardships and become faithful and clean and pure and good and beautiful? That's the better story. So anyway, another thing to consider, another objection to this idea of postmillennialism that I'm trying to convince you of, that is the core of Christian nationalism, is you just look around you. Is the world actually getting better? I think most of us would probably say no. But I want you to think of this more broadly. If you look at, say, the past 50 years, is America getting better? I don't think so. I think it's getting quite a bit worse, right? But what about 2,000 years ago? Is the world better now than it was 2,000 years ago? Obviously. Is the world better 1,500 years ago than it was 2,000 years ago? I think so. What about 1,000? Yeah. What about 500? Yeah. So as history progresses, if we look at a chart of like goodness of the world, there will be little dips. And what we are living in right now is one of those little dips. But on the chart, we are much higher. We're much better off than we were, 1,000 years ago, I think. And do you know why that is? Christianity. Christianity is why that is. Christianity has affected everything, like every major development in the world, for the past 1,000 years at least. Well, let's say, I mean, the world has been shaped by Christianity ever since it started. And then it was shaped prior to that by Judaism. And, the world is only becoming more and more shaped by Christianity as it grows, and it continues to grow. Now, some people would argue, and they would say, but Christians are still murdered today for their faith, and so therefore it's just as bad as it was 2,000 years ago. Now, think about what you're saying. And just think about the content. Like, you're right. Yeah, there are Christians being murdered today for their faith. But where? Do you know where? By tiny, primitive countries ruled by Islam. That's where Christians are getting murdered today. Do you know where Christians were getting murdered 2,000 years ago? By the biggest and most powerful and most civilized empire in the world. Can you even imagine America, England? I mean, even China. China doesn't murder Christians en masse. They might suppress Christianity. They don't want people to be Christians, but they don't murder them en masse and put their heads on pikes lining the streets like they did in the Roman Empire, right? Obviously, things are better than they were 2,000 years ago for Christians, for the world. So things are much better off. And if you expect things to get, people look around and they're like, oh man, these are signs of the times. The world must be ending soon because it's really bad. It is not worse than it was when Jesus walked the earth. When Jesus was born, called for the murder of every newborn baby. You think they'll do that in America? Like, yeah, we have en masse abortions and that's legalized, but like the government forcing you to get abortions, that's a different story. Or, even worse than that, the government killing actually, like 3-year-olds, right? Yeah, I mean, it's unimaginable. And so obviously things are better than they were. And so, what I'm trying to convince you of, what I'm trying to give you arguments for is post-millennialism. I think not because of Christian nationalism, but just because I think it's true. And if you are a Christian nationalist, just like this bozo said, if when you become a Christian nationalist, you are subscribing to postmillennialism. So watch out. You can't be a Christian nationalist and not a postmillennial. You have to be a postmillennial. I agree with that. I think to believe that you can make America a Christian country, which, I mean, we obviously should be trying to do. It is obvious. It is obvious that we should be trying to make the world around us conform to God's plan. And so if you believe that, well, I guess you're a Christian nationalist. If you believe that, I guess you're a postmillennial. You have to be. And we should be striving for consistency. And if you're going to be consistent, I guess if you believe that, Christians ought to actually live out their faith in the world, which the Bible very obviously teaches, I guess you're a Christian nationalist. I guess you're a postmillennial. I guess Scott Aniol is a Christian nationalist and a postmillennial. Because even Scott Aniol believes that our faith should impact the world around us and make it a better place. Now, he might draw the line somewhere. He might say, my faith can't impact, like God is God of me, but God's not the God of my kids. I don't think he says that. Hopefully he doesn't say that, but where do you draw the line? God is the God of my kids and me, but not the God of my neighbor. God is not sovereign over my neighbor. That's too far. Or would you say, God is the God of my town, my city, my neighborhood, but God is not the God of my state. Holy moly. Could you imagine that if God were sovereign over our state? Oh my gosh. I mean, God by no means is God over America. Can you imagine? Can you imagine God wanting America to be faithful to him? That is insane. I mean, come on. All right, let's go to G3, you guys. It's weird. It's inconsistent. It's silly. It's nonsense. If you believe your faith plays out in the world, and that your faith ought to impact your behavior, and if you're not living under a rock, you ought to be a Christian nationalist. All right. Tell me I'm wrong. Catch you next time. God bless.